Topic: sexual reproduction. Now, what is sexual reproduction? Production of offsprings. Production of offsprings, that means the new individuals, by the fusion of two gametes. We say these two gametes, usually one from each parent. Usually one from each parent. And what do? This fusion of two gametes to form a diploid zygote, and that zygote will develop into a mature organism. Clear? So we can simply say act of fusion. Act of fusion of gametes is known as fertilization. And fusion of two gametes to form a single cell or a zygote is also known as fertilization. So fertilization is a characteristic feature of the sexual reproduction. And when we talk about asexual mode of reproduction, we say, let's compare a little. What have we learnt in asexual? In asexual mode, what have we discussed? That only one parent is involved, either a male or a female, and that one is involved only the process of reproduction. Here, both are required. It's a mandatory condition that both are there. And two gametes belonging to different sex fuse with each other, form a zygote, form a new generation. And when this happens, won't the number go up very high? This is a question which comes to our mind. Here I say, let's talk about in terms of ploidy. What is ploidy? This is known as haploid. Means half set of gametes. Half set of gametes. If I'm talking about this is known as diploid. Let's keep this concept a different. 2n stands for diploid. Means complete set. If we are talking about asexual reproduction, then what will happen if the parent is n or the parent is 2n? It will undergo division and give rise to the same copies. Okay. N will give rise to nn and 2n will give rise to 2n, and so on. The further process goes on. When the number gets equated every time, this is known as equational division or mitotic division. Okay, what do we call it? Mitosis. In other terms, equational division. Here we say parent is 2n. First division is always reductional division. And the second is equational. Then the number gets restored. Now, second division and the first division. First means meiotic, first division, which is reductional. And then second, meiotic, which means equational. Does it get ended up here? No. This is known as formation of gametes. And formation of gametes is always followed up by meiotic process, meiotic division, where a diploid cell will give rise to 4 haploid bodies or the 4 haploid germ cells after division. In this process, when we receive gametes with a haploid content, which further fertilizes with the opposite sex to restore the ploidy. Now, how this happens, we are going to discuss. Before that, this is what we are talking about is happening in all body germ cell, somatic cells. This is particularly for the formation of gametes, but this mitotic division is for the somatic cells of our body. That means to cover up the number of cells, to replenish, to repair, to regrow the number of cells that we all have. This is mitosis and this is meiosis. Moving to what happens in this fertilization process and how this meiosis haploid set that we have received is going to help. Supposingly the division that we have shown has come from male, same division has come from the female partner and will undergo fertilization. During this time, what is going to happen? Obviously, fertilization of these two will restore the number to 2n. Okay, fertilization of these two will automatically restore the number to 2n. Therefore, we say whenever meiosis takes place in sexual reproduction, there are certain advantages over the asexual reproduction, and these advantages basically are, or we can see the advantages followed up when we take up this meiosis processes. Number one, it always accumulate variations. Why? See, very simple. This has come from male, this has come from female. What is this meiosis process doing? It is showing diversity of characteristics which has acquired from both the partners, and during fertilization a zygote has formed. This zygote will acquire both the traits and both the characters. So automatically what is it doing? It is showing new combination of genes. New combination of genes, and automatically it will accumulate variations. Number two, it also helps in the origin of new species. Why? Because variations always lead to evolution. Then, third, it has more survival rate. What does it mean? Supposingly these variations will help in withstand high temperature zone, or it may help any species or any niche to grow in unfavorable conditions. Automatically there is more survival rate. Now, how the variations are generated? Let's come to the point. How these variations are generated. For these variations to take place, we always talk about DNA, which plays a major role. We say variations, these are generated due to DNA copying during gamete formation. Which moves to the next generation. See, whenever DNA of two different individuals, it combines together, ultimately what happens? A new combination trait is formed. Right? So, when DNA of two different individuals, it comes together or it copies, then during that time DNA copying will help in the accumulation of variations from the previous generation. And two different individuals in a population would have distinct pattern of accumulated variations. See, this have inherited something else, this have inherited something else. Now this one has inherited whatever from the previous generation will show a trend that is coming from their ancestors as well. And all the different variations occurring in living organisms assumed that these do not have any bad effects at all. Combining the distinct variations from two or more individuals in sexual reproduction will automatically lead to new combinations. And new combinations always have a highest survival rate. Clear? This is how all these variations are accumulated generation after generation. Now, and what plays a major role in maintaining all the generations? Never forget meiosis. Why? Because whatever we are now, it's all because of the content which is obtained from the diploid ploidy into haploid gametes. Then after fertilization with any other different variety of trait, it will lead to restoring the same diploid content. And throughout what it has done, it has accumulated variations. See, if there is no meiosis, each new generation will result in having twice the number of amount of DNA that the previous generation had. Supposingly 2n, instead of giving it to n, it is going to give rise to 2n only, right? What is it going to give rise to? 2n. Now this 2n number, 2n plus 2n, it will give rise to 4n, right? That is completely no. Means if it continues for generations and generations, very soon a situation will arise when the amount of DNA will not be accommodated inside the cell, and there will be no other cellular content except DNA. So ultimately, what are we waiting for? That there will be no room for anything else? This is what is a nature's law to solve this problem, that this is a special kind of division which will help in the formation of gametes. And when the gametes are formed, they will automatically undergo pairing up to restore the same content. So during meiosis, the number of chromosomes is first becomes half in the gametes and then restored in the progeny once again. Alright, this is what about that how sexual reproduction is explained. Now, we talk about the two types of sexual reproduction that we have to study in this chapter. One is in plants and another one is in human beings or animals. First of all, sexual reproduction in plants. When we talk about sexual reproduction in plants, we say a flower is basically a specialized condensed reproductive unit. Specialized condensed reproductive unit. It has two different types of parts in it. That is the reproductive as well as the accessory parts. Right. So, what are these? Calyx. Are we all aware of what is calyx? These are known as sepals, the green, yes. Corolla. These are known as petals, the colorful ones which will attract pollinators. Then here we say androecium or stamen. And gynoecium or we say carpel. These are the two reproductive units and these are the two accessory units. Both are important. Now coming to the functioning based on the structure of a flower. We draw always the longitudinal section of a flower and we say it is resting on a thalamus or a pedicel which has the green colored whorls and the brightly colored petals which are all around. Now, moving to what we have to label it as. As per the labeling, we say this one is the thalamus, the resting stalk. These are the sepals, which are green colored. Then, from here, we show the bilobed structure known as anther with the filament, and this anther is full with pollen grains. These are the pollen grains which on maturity are present here. Fine. So this anther and filament together form the stamen, and if these are so many, group of stamens is known as androecium. Alright, androecium is a collective term for the group of stamens, and an anther and a filament together is known as stamen. What is this? This is the stigma, the receptive disc, the style of a flower, that means the gynoecium, and ovary which contains the ovule. All three together are known as carpel or gynoecium. Group of carpel is known as gynoecium. Now, what is calyx or sepals? The outermost wall of floral leaves, generally green in color, protective in function. Corolla, petals, brightly colored. Why? To attract the insect pollinators. They are essential, but they are not directly involved in reproduction. They are the essential parts, accessory parts. Then it is androecium that we have discussed here. It has the male reproductive organ. This basically the male reproductive unit in it. That is the pollen grain. It has anther, the bilobed anther, and the filament. Filament is a stalk, and it contains pollen factories in it where the pollen grains are formed. Now, gynoecium, stigma, style, and the ovary. Ovary contains the ovule, which has two protective coverings around it. Clear? Coming to whenever the pollen grains are shed from the same flower onto the same stigma of the same flower within itself, that is called self-pollination. First of all, why pollination is necessary? What happens if fertilization has to take place? For fertilization, the first initial step or the beginning step is always pollination. Pollination means the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or a different flower. So based on it, it is of two types. Now moving to that. The first step of fertilization process is pollination. Means transfer of pollen grains, right? Where? From anther to the stigma. Here we are writing a general definition from anther to the stigma. Stigma of a carpel. When this pollination is to be achieved, it is of two types: self or cross pollination. Self, as the name suggests, transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower. Okay, same flower is self. No agency required, like wind or water. No agency is required for the transfer of pollen grains. Then another important feature is it will not bring variations, because it is happening sometimes in the same flower. Then how will it bring variations? Like, see, there is a flower and there is another flower. If it is happening here, self, from here to here, self, because it is taking place in plant A only. Clear? Transfer of pollen grain in the same flower or from one flower to another flower, but on the same plant, is self. When we talk about cross, we say transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower. And this one particularly in different plants, right? From here to here, A to B. Here, this one, it involves the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of the same flower or to the stigma of another flower but borne on the same plant. Stigma of the same flower or stigma of another flower but borne on the same plant. Clear? This involves transfer of pollen grains from one flower to another flower, but same species. They can differ in species as well, but we generally say the right type is always accepted in the same species. What do you think about variations? Yes, it will accumulate variations. This one will bring variations, and agency is required here in this point. Now moving to the process in detail. What has happened? After pollination, the flower will come and sit on the landing disc. We are not drawing much of the portion of a flower. We are only showing whatever is necessary. Okay. Now here is the content. This is the carpel region of a flower. Okay. And pollination, it results in the deposition of pollen grain onto the receptive disc. Now this absorbs water and will swell up. Then what will happen? One of the pollen tube grows into the stigma this way. Passes through the style and then move towards the ovarian cavity. What will it carry? It will carry two male gametes with it. This is how it is going to reach further. Now the two motile male gametes which are here are carried or formed inside the tube during its growth in the style region. After reaching the ovary, pollen tube enters the ovule through the micropyle end. This end, the lower end, is the micropyle end. It will not directly make a cross-section cut through this opening. This is the chalazal end. It will enter through the micropyle end. The tip of the tube finally, it moves inside. It goes inside the egg apparatus and enters the embryo sac of the ovum or the egg region. After this, the tip of pollen tube ruptures, releasing these two male gametes into the embryo sac. What is an embryo sac? The mature embryo sac consists of an egg apparatus, means one haploid egg and two synergids, two polar nuclei and three antipodal cells. Okay, this one is egg apparatus. These are two polar nuclei and these are three antipodal cells. Let's mark them here. This is the haploid egg cell. These are the two polar nuclei. These are the two synergids, which always guide the pollen tube to gain entry into it. These are the three antipodal cells. Antipodal cells. Clear? This is what is a 7-celled 8-nucleate structure. Now, we can easily see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8-celled and 8-nucleate structure. Right? But what happens whenever the pollen tube is growing inside this style region carrying the two male gametes? Meanwhile, this central cell also undergoes fusion of its two cells, forming one and having two nuclei. So the two cells fuse together to form one cell having two nuclei. So what it transforms into? It transforms into 7-celled 8-nucleate structure. Okay? It is not clear. I will write it clearly. Antipodal. This is the structure of an egg with which fertilization takes place. Clear? Now, how fertilization is achieved? What happens during fertilization? See, always remember there are two male gametes that we have talked about. There is one egg cell and this one is the polar nuclei, means the central cell. Okay? Always remember these two things which are going to undergo fertilization. Now moving to the act of fertilization. In fertilization process or during fertilization, one male gamete that means the first one, right? It fuses with the that egg cell or the egg nucleus. What does it form? It will form zygote. So this is also N. This is also N. It will become 2N. This is a normal fusion that takes place in all the organisms and we call this as syngamy. What do we call it? Syngamy. Second is when the second male gamete ploidy N fuses with the polar nuclei. Ploidy 2N, because there are two nuclei, it will give rise to, first of all, it will give rise to PEN, primary endosperm nucleus, and the number goes to 3N, because N plus 2N give rise to 3N, and this will give rise to endosperm with the ploidy 3N. Alright, and this fusion where three nuclei are formed, we call it triple fusion. Okay, so what is this fertilization known as? This is a unique phenomena in angiosperms. That means all the flowering plants, and is known as double fertilization, because first is syngamy which is taking place, second is triple fusion which is taking place, therefore it is known as double fertilization. And what is formed in this fertilization? A zygote as well as an endosperm. What is the purpose of this endosperm? The process of triple fusion which has formed this endosperm, it is helpful for the nourishment of this zygote. Now, zygote which is formed here, it will develop into embryo. Alright? And when this develops into embryo, the entire endosperm is going to nourish it. What is the fate of other parts of a plant? We basically see what is the fate of, first of all, this seed, then this ovule and this fruit. In this process, when this whole process is going on, this is the ovule which has grown or further developed into seed, and ovary into fruit. Okay, ovule into seed, ovary into fruit, because this is how these all were located. Like, this is the region that we have discussed where the fertilization took place. This is where the egg was present. This is how every fruit has a seed within. Same way, the fruit becomes, or the ovary becomes the fruit, and the ovule becomes the seed. And where is embryo located? Within the seed. Alright, because zygote is formed within the egg, right? So, embryo is present within the seed. So, this is how it is. The outer one, ovary, becomes the fruit, then ovule becomes the seed, and embryo is present within the seed. This is about fertilization or sexual fertilization or reproduction in plants, especially the flowering plants.